Okay, I'm going to do a third update video for my Grizzly table saw switch problem. I did an update video a while ago thinking I solved my problem, and then the next day the problem came back. So there's a bit of irony with that. So that led me to believe I never solved my problem or I damaged something else further, because what happened was I was using my table saw, I was ripping some 2x8s, and I encountered a piece of reaction wood which clamped down on the blade like a brake, and it was a really tough piece of board, and I thought I could get through it, but it ended up stopping the blade completely, which is hard to do on a 5 horsepower machine, but that did occur, and when that occurred it tripped the thermal overload on my magnetic switch assembly. So that cut power to the machine, and then when I tried to run the machine again, the problem with my switch came back, and it was just like it was before. So that led me to believe that overloading my electronic system here did something to cause my problem to come back. So I was pretty much back to the drawing board. This is the contactor, and this is the thermal overload over here. And here's the wiring diagram for people who want to see the diagram. I'm not really that great at reading these, but so this is the switch over here. And there's an extra prong on here which connects right here. It's a white wire, and it interacts with a copper coil that's inside this switch, and so that connects to the thermal overload over here, and that's the connection that wasn't working in here as far as we can tell. So it's a very simple switch. The two leads connect together there, and this white wire is like an interrupter. So when the thermal overload disengages, it interrupts this switch and disconnects. But for some reason, maybe the coil was bad in here, and that it just wasn't getting enough juice to keep that connection intact. So this actually functions as a momentary switch if this white wire isn't functioning properly. I only ran the saw for a day when the switch was functioning perfectly. I thought it was my circuit breaker, and I did this on a tip from another YouTuber that said they had the same problem, and he replaced the circuit breaker, and that solved his problem. I guess these can go bad in some cases. So I replaced my circuit breaker and the saw changed. It worked fine. And I can't explain that. I can't explain why that interaction was taking place, because when the problem came back the second time, I thought, okay, well maybe something's going on with the circuit breakers. So I replaced it again a second time, and when I did that, it seemed like it improved it some, but then it really didn't solve the problem. So I did a line test on my voltage to see if there was a fluctuation between in current. So I ruled that out. It was okay, because I got some advice from the Grizzly Tech. I spoke with Grizzly again, and he said these magnetic contactors will not work properly if you get a voltage drop below 200 volts. So I had to check to make sure that my voltage was okay, because if it was dropping below 200 volts, that would explain why it wouldn't stay connected. But I had the voltage, it was at 220, the way it should be. So, and we also did another test. We disconnected the leads of the motor to the magnetic switch assembly, so we just had power running to the contactor and the switch, and the problem was still there. It was still bouncing around and not staying connected. So that ruled out anything with the motor and the possibility that the capacitors may be going bad. So we were able to isolate the problem to this part right here, which is the original switch, which initially I thought was the problem. But that was before I knew how any of this other stuff worked. And, I bought this part based on the Grizzly Tech's recommendation, based on, the details that I gave him over the phone. We were able to isolate it to that problem with a temporary switch, which is on here right now. And this switch works differently. When I press the start button, it mechanically engages. And so the wire that would connect and interact with this copper coil is not connected to anything in here right now. But I can use the saw. It works fine. However, it's not connected to my thermal overload, so I have to be careful that I don't overload my saw and cut through any wanky boards. Because if I do, then it could maybe damage my motor. And I also had a machine guy come and look at my setup here and see if he could figure out what the problem was. So I had somebody who was very experienced with machines and wiring, and he looked at this and thought it was pretty goofy. And he thought I paid way too much for this part. He actually quoted me a price for $200, which was what I paid for this, to take everything out of this machine and give me a proper made in USA brand name contactor, assembly, and switch combination right where it's supposed to be mounted. So he was willing to take all my wiring out, redo everything for the same price that I paid for the replacement factory part that I didn't need to replace. I just wanted to give an update on this, that I was able to isolate the problem and diagnose it better. And I can't really explain why changing the circuit breakers changed the behavior of this part to make it work a little bit better, and then it would just seem like it would just get worse again. So that's that.